The South African Digital Marketing Podcast is made in collaboration with Sean Lutz. Coming up in this episode of the South African Digital Marketing Podcast.
You made the slogan. Tarryn.
There we go. Relationships and responsibility.
But, I think in any industry, it's very much about the relationships and the connections that you make.
When it does happen, it really sticks out like a sore thumb.
That constant reinforcement of we asked, we promised, we delivered. Hi, we're here to ask again.
Are you maybe worried that your first year was too successful? And
Absolutely.
Now you have to keep
of course I am. Of course I am.
Welcome to the South African Digital Marketing Podcast. My name is Terrence Mentor, and I'm a digital marketer who's on a mission to speak to the best, brightest, and most interesting marketers in the country. Today's guest is the head of marketing at Ford South Africa, Tarryn Knight. We started our conversation talking about what it's like working right next to the car factory and whether or not she ever pops her head in to see how the vehicles actually get made. But don't worry, we also talk about marketing too. So let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Tarryn Knight.
Absolutely. Obviously, I've got to put a high-vis jacket on and walk across and get into the factory and make sure that my phone is checked in for any sort of confidential new products that may or may not be coming. But yeah, it's literally on the premises.
That is really cool. So if Tarryn ever asks you over for a cup of coffee to meet her, this is a chance to say yes and see some cool factory work happening.
Absolutely.
Tarryn, you're saying that you're the head of marketing. What kind of team are you leading at Ford South Africa at the moment?
So my team is comprised of events and sponsorships, is the one part of it. Then we've got a digital manager who focuses very much, her team focuses on lead, digital, CRM. It's really quite a hub of different disciplines. And then we've got the marketing communications team where they focus on, advertising, social media platforms, and all of our campaigns that we bring to market.
So that's really interesting because a lot of the more senior leaders like yourself that I talk to, one of the things they complain about is that they get quite separated from the actual work, the actual kind of coalface marketing. And, since you are managing these three separate teams, I'm guessing there's managers of those teams that support the work that they do. Are you able to find yourself sometimes like doing the LinkedIn posts or the Facebook posts or being at the events, or is most of your time just making sure that the work gets done as effectively as possible?
Well, I think, I definitely do my own LinkedIn. We don't, we don't have the resources to do that kind of stuff, which is quite interesting because I think a lot of professionals on LinkedIn do have people doing their posts. So although I don't get to post as often as I'd like to, or get to share as much of the cool things that are going on and what the brand is doing and what I'm experiencing within this company, it does remain very authentic. I know that I can get a bit behind in the DMs and things like that, as you know, because it's taken us a while to set this up. But it's literally because I don't have a team doing it. So I often miss things, but I do try every now and then just to go in and catch what I can. And I think coming into this role a year ago, it's just over a year now, I've been very fortunate to be immersed in a lot of the workings of the team. We've done a lot of things differently over the last year, as I've been told. So it's been really nice to kind of get back to my roots and kind of really immerse myself in some of the portfolios that I used to manage, over the years. So I have been very involved in that. And I think this year I'll probably move into other spaces of the business that I'm needing to get more involved in. But the team are really great about involving me in key areas. So I do still get to do some of the really cool stuff.
just dip a toe into the kind of more fun parts of marketing.
Absolutely.
You did mention that this is kind of just coming to the end of your first year in your tenure at the business. Can you maybe tell us, looking back, which is sometimes something that we don't do as marketers, right? We don't do a lot of looking back. There's so much looking forward and planning to get out that looking back sometimes doesn't happen. But maybe looking back over this last year, is there something that you look back on and go, that was a massive win, not just for the team, but actually for Tarryn personally?
Yeah, I think, that's the other thing about, when you're heading up teams, everything you achieve is because the team buys in and puts in the
Mm,
work. So it becomes really difficult to separate the two. So I think, in terms of a big one personally, my previous, where I'd worked previously, I'd worked for almost 19 years. So changing to another automotive group was a big change for me. And I think, being able to conquer that was, and make a fundamental change in my routine and where I'm
mm,
going and the people I work with, to have all new people was a big win. I think it was really good and healthy for us as individuals not to get too comfortable. But for what we achieved as a team, if I look at it, and I actually wrote down some of the metrics for a report, looking back on last year, and I actually can't believe what we've managed to achieve in terms of just our brand metrics. So sentiment
mm.
around some of the key brand metrics. I mean, the increases are phenomenal. And then not only that, but being able to actually connect customers and prospects with our dealers. I mean, the numbers in terms of what we've been able to contribute to the work of our dealers and actually getting customers and dealers connected is also,
Mm.
huge increases year on year. So I'm just really blessed to be working with a team that is just so dialed in, excited, and been able to achieve so much over the last year.
Are you maybe worried that your first year was too successful and now you have to
Absolutely. Of
keep up
course
that
I am. Of course I am. Um, I'm like, shoot, it really made this second year going to be quite difficult. But um, I will also say, though, that, I've, especially this week, we've been sitting in a lot of meetings with the agency. And you also asked about my team. We've got a
Mm,
media agency and obviously a creative production agency that are, globally appointed. We've got a very strong global network as Ford. And just looking at some of the stuff that's coming, Terrence, I can't tell you. We're all so excited about what's coming for Ford this year. Yeah. So I think the best is still yet to come. We're building on the momentum.
that's very exciting, and I hate not knowing, but we'll have to be patient. We'll just be
Mm.
patient, and we'll see what good things come out. Uh, Being able to connect the marketing work to like literal sales, that must be just the most exciting and biggest win, because this is something that, like, the idea of attribution is the kind of big hot topic of
Mm.
how do we prove that the money we're spending on marketing is actually leading to bottom line sales. As a more senior marketer, as I've become older, I've started to realize that yes, you can come up with the greatest creative, and it could be the most heart wrenching, emotional marketing ever. But if the sales don't increase, you're wasting your time. Is that something that your team gets as well, or are you having to really steady the ship when it comes to, yes, there's a million great things we could do, but it has to affect that bottom line?
It's such an interesting conversation. And, I was actually thinking about it this morning in terms of there is a deep appreciation. I think marketers have become so much more responsible over the last, let's call it 20 years, in terms of actually proving the bottom line, showing the funnel, really
Mm,
proving your kind of from awareness all the way through the mid funnel, right to your conversions, benchmarking, that kind of stuff. And in automotive, it's particularly interesting because your purchase cycles are not like FMCG. You're talking
mm,
about customers, they used to change their cars every 3 to 4 years. We're now seeing buying cycles 5 to 7 years. So that investment you're making in marketing, is really important for securing those sales down the line. I
mm.
think events is probably the hardest one to quantify in terms of your returns and your attribution to actual sales. But I will say that marketing, I will say, the actual media has become a lot stronger. I mean, what we're able to
Mm,
measure now and everything is phenomenal. We've still got a way to go, but it is phenomenal. But what I do want to say is that what I have found is that the C-suite has actually become a lot more open to understanding the importance of brand and investing,
mm.
forward. I think especially for something like automotive, there is a real genuine understanding that you've got to be investing. You're not necessarily going to see the sales immediately. And something I found that's personally stood me in very good stead is I make sure that my communication and my sessions with our CFO, whoever is uh, responsible for measuring us and our budgets against our results, it really understands what we're trying to achieve, the short, the medium, and the long term, and just making sure that communication is open, and also that we understand that they've got EBIT targets, they've got
Mm.
forecasting accuracy in terms of our spend, so both on what we're delivering and also how we're forecasting our spend helps them achieve what they need. So the whole thing works together. And it's probably a very long answer to your question, but these are the kind of conversations as get further and further removed from the actual work and the fun of shooting TV commercials and designing social media campaigns. These are the kind of conversations that you have where you do have to defend what your
Mm.
choices as the CMO, and for on behalf of your team.
And I guess so you kind of move from being the petulant child that's always wanting more pocket money, more pocket money, more pocket money to do fun things, to being a real partner and saying, yes, this is going to cost some money, but there's a reason for it. And I guess developing their sense of trust in you, that when Tarryn says, we're going to have to invest this now, and we're only going to see a return in 5 years' time, when the new, like you're saying, that new cycle of buying happens, that they
Mm.
go, well, Taryn knows what she's talking about. She has, I mean, it's been a year. She hasn't let us down so far. She's got all of this experience in the industry. I guess that's where having 19, 20 years in one particular industry becomes really important. If I had to jump into the automotive industry right now, I love cars, but I would have a lot to learn and a lot of credit to gain before I could kind of get the trust that you have. So do you feel that within your C-suite and the people you work with?
I think, it all comes down to relationships. Look, automotive is quite a particular beast. Once you get in, they say once the petrol's in your blood, it's very hard to get out of it. But I think in any industry, it's very much about the relationships, and the connections that you make. If you're respecting everybody for the part they play in the whole ecosystem, then what you can achieve together often far
Mm,
surpasses your own thoughts or plans or ideas. So I do think that the relationships are really important, but it's actually what you do in every little day. So right from the beginning, are you, for me, for example, am I managing my fleet of vehicles, the marketing fleet? Am I managing very closely? Am I making sure that I respect the targets that we have around,
mm,
what we're holding there? Do I respect the governance principles and requirements of the role that I have in my team's portfolio? Am I working well with legal? Am I, working well with procurement, etc.? And those little things and those little bits every day, if you do those things with excellence, then
mm,
when you start having a bigger conversation and say, look, can we tap into maybe a little bit of extra marketing budget because there's this thing we want to deliver, then there's that trust to kind of go, okay, well,
mm.
let's support a business case with marketing to do that, and you work with product on what you want to put forward. And then, if you come back and say, look what we delivered, and there's that constant reinforcement of we asked, we promised, we delivered. Hi, we're here to ask again, you know. Um, but it comes down to your everyday delivery, your execution, your attention to detail, and then the bigger stuff falls into place.
I really like that idea of almost like relationships and responsibility. If you kind of tick those two boxes, if you
Oh, I
fulfill those
love
well,
that. Love that.
I mean, you told me, so I'm just picking up what you're
But
what you're
you
saying.
made the slogan. You made the
I
slogan,
made this.
Tarrant.
There we go. Really,
Yeah.
relationships and responsibility. I think that's really great, because again, it can feel overwhelming if you just look at something as simple as the channels that we have to choose, there's all these decisions that have to be made throughout just a day and through a week and a month of a whole marketing team. But knowing that these two things are like the most
Mm.
important, are we ticking those two boxes? Feels doable on the one hand, but also on the other hand, it also feels like there's a way you can know that you're not ready for marketing leadership if the idea of doing every small thing with excellence scares you. maybe that's maybe the job isn't for you. Like maybe being a specialist is like your call for your career. I really want to dig down a little bit into the concept of brand because you were talking about that a little bit earlier. Obviously, Ford is both a South African brand, but it's also a international brand.
Mm,
Um, how do you find those two kind of not necessarily say opposing brand identities work, but really different brand identities. Ford is in South Africa, in my mind, feels very like family focused. There's like a history there. There's nostalgia. There's the Buckies. That's the feel. Whereas again, I could be completely wrong about the international brand or the US version of Ford, but it feels very like muscle car-y and
yeah.
petrol head and hyper masculine. Do you find that there's a conflict between those two identities?
It's very interesting. I think, what's really important when you're part of an international brand, and I can speak also for the previous brands, that
Mm,
I've worked on where the situation was quite similar. Um, it's so, yes, it is an incredible balance. And again, it comes back to those partnerships. I think
mm,
it's really important to create that trust and that awareness that you really understand your market. And you've got to be, I had a colleague who used to say, you've got to be as global as possible, but as local as necessary. So the emphasis on the global brand. But I do believe very firmly in locally relevant, local stories, local investment,
mm.
and local understanding. It's not only the cultural nuances, but South Africans are very, well, let's say Southern Africans are a very particular kind of people, and we're a beautiful people, and there's just so much. And I think about companies like Ford, that it's, when you think about how long they've been in our country, it's actually mind blowing.
Mm.
I was looking the other day that the factory for Ford in South Africa was built in 1923. So
Oh, whoa.
we've yeah. So Ford has been invested in South Africa in terms of selling and producing vehicles for over 100 years. And so when we talk, local storytelling, and I know one of the things you wanted to chat about was a bit about that,
Mm.
there really is. It's not only about the rich history, but it's about, you really do, you've earned the right to tell a South African story and share the South African stories because you've really invested in, you've got the Ford Wildlife Foundation that's invested in wildlife. You've got all the CSI projects. We've invested in the communities and the people. You're creating jobs. All of those things where you're saying we are really a part, as much a citizen of this country as you are, and we really want to unlock your capability as a citizen of this country too. And I think that
Yeah.
understanding that, that's as much about an American dream. It sounds very similar to an American dream, but it's a very South African truth as well. So it's not competing, where you find that at the end of the day, we're all humans. Maybe the way we express ourselves is different, but we're all human at the end of the day. And we're all looking to unlock what's next in terms of our capabilities and our achievements. So I find it beautiful, and I find it, I don't want to say easy, that would be not fair, but it's just natural.
Possible. It's
It's
it
natural,
works.
definitely,
It's natural.
absolutely. Yeah.
And I think we've seen the bad version of that with some marketing, not from Ford, but when international companies come into South Africa, either there are times where they don't even try to like actually be South African and it doesn't work, or they try to be South African, and because they don't have that, like talking about that deep history, that understanding of the culture, the permission to talk to us, it rings really false when they do try. And I'm not going to mention any particular brands. You never know who I might want to work for in the future, but when it does happen, it really it really sticks out like a sore thumb. Um, and so it does make sense to focus in on all of that kind of heritage that the brand could have. And like you said, I did want to talk about storytelling a lot. That was one of the things I'm really interested in, because it does seem to me that, especially in the automotive industry, when I look at like the best car ads in South Africa, of all time, even the best ads in South Africa, they all seem to be car ads with some sort of like emotional storytelling angle.
Mm.
Often there are kids involved, or it's like, there's so many times where it's like a dad and his son experiencing something together, and they grow. It's all of those kinds of
All
of
those
of
human
ads.
truths.
All
Yeah.
those human truths that we're all like, yes,
Yeah.
and the first time you cry as a man is because you're watching one of those ads.
You're
Um,
watching a car
you
ad.
know,
Yeah,
it's
sounds
because I'm
about right.
watching a car ad. It's sad but true. Um, is there actual value in that kind of emotive storytelling? Because I know that to craft that kind of marketing campaign takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of real expertise to hit the mark right. Is it worth that to the bottom line to actually to do that kind of brand work?
I think it's personally, my view is that it's more than worth it. I think it's a responsibility. I think it's really
Mm,
important. Um, I guess I take a very, what's the word I'm looking for, but a very existential approach to the work that I do. It's not just, for me, it's not just about selling cars. It really
mm,
does come down to, are we sharing people's stories, and that's what I think makes selling cars, or marketing cars, I should say, just so addictive. Because if you think about what mobility means to people, what it
mm,
enables, it enables jobs, it enables, being able to go and see your family, see your friends. It enables travel. There's so many
mm,
things that access to mobility achieves for people, that it feels like a responsibility to tell those stories and keep inspiring people, and showcasing what mobility in this country unlocks for so many people. And when you look at it that way, it just takes on a different meaning.
mm,
And a lot of car advertising, what I noticed over the time that I've worked in the industry, is there was a period where maybe only a handful of brands, if any. In fact, there was probably just one brand, and I was fortunate enough to ultimately start my career with that brand. There was one brand that really stood out in terms of amazing advertising in South Africa in the 80s and so on. And and then over time, and also if I think of Ford and you go back, but you need a Bantam kind of advertising. I mean, amazing, amazing stuff that we who grew up in the 80s, like, you just remember that stuff.
yep.
Um, and I think there were just a handful of brands that really did advertising well in the beginning in terms of the motor industry. And then it kind of there was a period of a bit of sameness, where there was a lot of copying going on with some of the new entrants in the brand at a certain period in time. And then suddenly, recently, everything just became about like specs, and you know, you got to say you're premium, and you got to show all your specs, and then you got to, you have a good price. And it's just, I think when you're a brand like Ford that's been in the country for so long, that just has such a strong emotional attachment for a lot of people, it's really important to tell those stories and remind people what you stand for as a brand. And I think,
Yeah.
what I'm excited about is doing a lot more of that.
It does feel like we spoke earlier about being responsible to the people you work with, to the other members of the, not just your particular marketing team, but everyone within the organization. And now you're also talking to like the responsibility to the customer, which is something that we don't really talk about much as marketers. We kind of feel like once once we've done our thing, the customer becomes someone else's problem. Really, like
Yeah.
we don't really think about that. But I really like that idea of like being responsible and caring for their stories, caring
Mm.
for where they come from, what they've experienced, and how the brand has affected their lives in different ways, or at least has been present for those moments in their life. Um, and I can totally see what you're saying, where those are always going to stand out, those marketing campaigns, compared to just this is the car, this is what it does, it gets you
Here's
from
the
A to B
price.
because here's the price, because that's what all products do. They do the thing that they have in the box.
And there's a place for that. You do have to, you want to show customers that your vehicle is, attainable and
Sure.
affordable. But it's the way you do it.
Yeah.
Respect your customers enough to like make them laugh while you do it, or share a heartwarming story. Don't just throw it out there. So yeah.
Yeah, and I guess especially with cars, it also is about, the car you drive kind of represents who you are as a person, so
Yeah.
there is that
Still,
identity you want to still. I mean, I clearly I'm not a very superficial person, but it is nice to drive a nice car that has a history towards it, or like I am this kind of person. So understanding that and respecting that must be a very crucial part of your job. I don't want to keep you for way too long, because I know that you're very busy, and it is. And people will listen to this at another time, but we're recording this on a Friday afternoon, so we have a
don't worry,
weekend.
I'm still going to be here for a while.
So no, oh
But
no.
if you let me, I'll chat to you for the rest of the day because I
Oh, you see,
do,
this is
yeah,
danger.
do love what I do.
Yeah, we're both chatty Cathys. Maybe we can get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts of some of the things
Mm.
that you and your team are doing. You did mention you have those kind of three subgroups underneath marketing. If you can remind me again, it was events, there was digital marketing, and there was a
And
third
marketing
one,
communications,
and
so all
marketing
the campaigns
communications.
and things. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Uh, do those three groups, do they work together? Do they affect each other's work? Or do they kind of have their own projects that they work separately in?
No, well, they're very interconnected. So I'll have one-on-ones with the leaders in each area because there are certain things that that they need to focus on. But, our team meetings, that collaboration is there, absolutely. And then we always have regular connects with the sales team, the ownership or after sales team, the product team, etc. There's various forums where there's a sort of a cross-functional
Mm,
integration. When we talk about bringing a product to market, that's very integrated, and so there's a lot of that cross collaboration. We talk about a handoff between marketing. They trying to get the leads, they're trying to get the traffic. My digital managers wanting to track and manage the leads and make sure that all of our customers get called by the dealers, and we ultimately satisfy what they're looking for. So there's a lot of that
mm.
interaction. So it's very integrated. I mean,
Uh,
you'll see, we all wearing our month end shirts. It's not
oh,
only a
yes.
Friday, but it's the last day of the month. So we've all got these like shirts that we arrived and we've all walked around in our shirts today. So we're a very integrated team.
And I mean, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see it says Tarryn and Hi. Is that what it's saying in cursive?
Yeah, it's so
Hi.
we've all got our little sayings underneath our names. Everyone's got a different one, and then we've got, our team logo on the back. But
Right.
um it's yeah, my team, when I did the shirts for all of them, and that, one of my team members says, yeah, but you always come in the morning and you go hi, and so that then became that became mine. But yeah, so a little bit of fun. You got to have fun while you're doing what you're doing.
Of course, but with the more marketing side of things, because I guess there's a whole other conversation about actually the day-to-day leading of just leading people, like managing people. Maybe one day when I grow up, that's what this podcast will merge, will become something more along those lines. But for now, what kind of marketing strategies do you see are going to potentially give you big wins in 2026? What are your teams looking at for uh, great exposure, great storytelling, really connecting with the audiences? What spaces
Yeah.
are working?
Oh gosh, Terence, there's so much. I mean, when I walked in here in January last year, I just said to myself, this place is a gold mine. Ford is involved in so much. They've got so much going on. We need to get this more out there. We need to show this more. So I think what we're planning on doing is showcasing a lot more of the things that are going on through
Mm,
social media. Um, and we've got some really exciting campaigns. Ford has got a new sort of positioning overseas, and we're going to be bringing that to South Africa. So you talk about that collaboration. When you talk
mm,
about the brand strategy, it's really important that we don't just adopt what's happening with the brand globally, but we really look at it and we go, what does this mean in South Africa? What is the South Africanness of this? And the great thing about a brand like Ford is that it's so easy to find that resonance because it's seated in the human truth. And so we're going to
mm.
be bringing that in, and we've got some exciting campaigns and products coming. So there's a lot that's going to be happening this year. So watch the space.
So the 2026 numbers are going to just dwarf the 2025 numbers. We'll be talking in a year's time,
That's
and
the
you're
hope.
going to. That's
But
the
don't
that's the
speak
hope.
too loud because the sales director's walking up and down here, and it's too soon to create expectations.
He's just rubbing his hands with glee every time he walks
Yeah,
past your office.
yeah.
Tarryn, just one last question then, and this one I haven't prepped you for, but let's say someone is looking at Tarryn Knight and going, that's the seat I want to be in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. What are one or two pieces of advice you would give to that, up and coming marketer? Definitely feels like they could be a leader, loves the idea of being in charge of a brand and be responsible for a brand. What maybe one or two pieces of advice that you would give to that person?
Well, I mean, if someone had told me, 22 years ago, maybe I'm giving away my age, gosh, someone had told me, someone
My
had told me to,
the gray hair in my beard gives me away, so that's fine.
but someone told me 22 years ago that I'd be where I am now. I wouldn't have believed them. I'd be very surprised. And I think what has really worked for me, and above all else, is, I don't want to say hard work, but it's focus and quality work. I put in the hours, especially in the early years, not being afraid of really learning new things, but putting in the hours, doing great work, learning the lessons. I think that's a big part of it. And I would say the second thing that has really served me well is really learning about other areas, connecting. I think the danger is just focusing on what I need to do in my job and delivering my job, my objectives. Then I'll be recognized and I'll get the next opportunity, whether it's sideways or upwards, etc. That's You really have to take every job that goes past your desk or that you touch. You use the opportunity to learn about other areas of the business, learn about what's important to those that are responsible for stewarding other areas of the business, because that time you put in now, when you a little bit later on, when you've got to make other decisions and you've got to learn how to drive projects forward, knowing about the other areas and knowing what's important to them really helps you to stand out in terms of connecting people, collaborating, and driving projects forward. So I would say, those are two things, like really putting in the work, you know, reaching beyond and outside of your own area to help others achieve what they need to as well, and learning on the process is really, really very valuable.
That's it for this episode of the SA Digital Marketing Podcast. Thank you so much to Tarryn for her time and her insights. Of course, you can always connect with her on LinkedIn. As always, please remember to subscribe to this podcast so that you don't miss the next episode, which is coming out in the next 2 weeks. I'll put the links to do all of that in the show notes. Thanks so much. This was the South African Digital Marketing Podcast.